Since the beginning of government, there has been one crucial decision to be made. How much influence should religion have? In this video, I will be discussing how this has affected America all the way back from colonial times to present day. And, spoiler alert, why our nation has decided why church and state should be separated. Now, I chose to talk about this topic because I'm interested to see how core values like religion affect the way that societies are built. Religion is just one of those things that has existed alongside humans for thousands of years. It's caused things like crusades and wars, but it's also affected the way that we think and communicate. But even more interesting to me is the way that governments react to religion. Some governments wholeheartedly accept religion as their supreme law, but others, like America, try to keep their government and religion as segregated as possible. But I want to know why. What influences a government to make these decisions, and how does it affect things like their politics, national identity, and general freedoms? It's inevitable that religion will come into conflict with the demands of politics. For some people, religion is the most important aspect of their life, so it only makes sense for it to dictate everything that they do, including the policies of their government. Over 70.6% of Americans today are Christians, 67% in Idaho. That's an overwhelming majority. This was the case for many pilgrims. Religion was a driving force for the mass migration that pushed exploration in a new, exciting America, but most importantly, it gave them hope and determination. American settlers saw themselves as acting agents of a divine providence. Puritan pilgrims traveled over 3,000 miles for their religious freedom, so it was common for many of their colonies to revolve around their religion. They were fixated on the idea that they had a right to religious freedom, even if that meant defending their views with aggressive methods of coercion. Places like Massachusetts Bay didn't even tolerate any differing opinions, and nonconformists would suffer consequences like whippings, fines, banishment, even imprisonment. Ironically enough, this became its own form of religious prosecution. From a conflict perspective, you can recognize how religion has enabled people in power to abuse their position. When government and religion were one, many colonies had religious groups that would use their status to maintain a hierarchy where they were dominant over another people group. Over time, colonists came to America in swarms of differing religions: Roman Catholic, Jewish, Lutheran, Protestant, Anglican, Quaker, Presbyterian. Oh my! They all came to America looking for the same religious freedom, and so eventually people recognized that there needed to be some sort of religious tolerance. Baptist preacher John Leland helped provide religious foundation for ideas explored by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and other founders concerning the appropriate relationship between religion and government. Leland bluntly expounded on his beliefs of separation of religion and government. Never promote men who seek after state-established religion. It's spiritual tyranny, the worst of despotism. For him, America shouldn't be a Christian nation, but rather one that recognizes the equality of all believers, whether Jews, Turks, pagans, or Christians. For him, government should protect the free thinking and speaking of every man, and see that one does not abuse another. Our country's founders, who are of different religious backgrounds themselves, knew that the best way to protect religious liberty was to keep religion out of the government. People like James Madison were inspired by John Leland and used their positions to make sure that state and church were separated. James Madison's goal was to draft, explain, and ratify a constitution that guaranteed the fundamental rights of everyone. He recognized that the Articles of Confederation not only led to a weak federal government, but gave his state legislators control over religious beliefs, which would ultimately lead to the violation of other basic rights. Now, our right to practice religion, or not, is protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Furthermore, America has had other revelations in religious freedoms too, like the 14th Amendment that prohibits any law from advancing or inhibiting any one religion, and the 6th Amendment, which states that no religious test shall be required as qualification for any federal office holders. But although our government has enforced separation of church and state on paper, it has still maintained a major influence on public life all the way since its colonial times. This influence doesn't necessarily mean that there is an establishment, aka letting religion have complete authority and power over the state. A better way to describe it would be civil religion. Robert Bellah coined this term civil religion to describe a weaker form of established church, in which religion doesn't exactly have official status, but the state still uses religious concepts in an explicitly public way. For example, he points to Abraham Lincoln, who, although was never baptized and was the only U.S. president never to join a church, used Christian imagery of slavery to justify the American Civil War. However, there have been some arguments for outright establishment in our country too. Philosophers like T.S. Eliot argued for outright establishment. He believed that democratic societies achieve ethical wisdom through traditions, specifically in this case, religion. And ergo, such societies without these traditions would degenerate into tyranny and/or social and cultural fragmentation. Yikes. Today, there are two major political perspectives on religion, that of conservatives and that of liberals. Conservatism argues for the political and ethical benefits of religion. In fact, many conservative evangelical Christians prioritize that their elected officials are aiding to these religious roles on state and local levels. This is a very functionalist way of looking at things because it argues and emphasizes the benefits that religion has on society, and specifically how it helps it function better. Conservatives strive for cultural homogeneity, especially within their social values. It helps people cooperate better and for political decisions to be made. But for there to be a social cohesion, there needs to be a common framework. Religion. So in this case, religion helps create a sense of political unity. In addition, religion has ethical benefits too. It accrues to citizens themselves as individuals, giving them a sense of belonging to a culture rooted in tradition, and portraying a sense of common truth, good, and salvation. On the other hand, liberals generally oppose establishment. Liberals appeal to the value of fairness, so they argue against establishment because our democratic society couldn't represent all of these people if it only supported one religion. So going back to that conflict perspective that recognizes when religion is in government, it gives unfair advantages to the dominant group, religious committees. This does not mean that liberals want to do away with religion. Liberals promote freedom of consciousness, which can be interpreted as the right to practice one's own religion. This is particularly important for the minority groups in America that are distinguished by their religion rather than their ethnicity, wealth, or gender. But it's so important to understand the double-edged consequences that too much religious pursuit has on the government. In extreme cases, a theocracy or an ecclesia is born. A theocracy is a form of government that bases all of its policies off of one specific religion. However, basing political actions off of a religion often comes into the conflicts with the interests of others. For example, Kentucky clerk Kim Davis demanded that she had the right not to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples because it offended her faith for them to marry. A theocracy sees no separation between government and religion. Your government becomes your religion, and your religion becomes your government. But people should be able to stand against their government without being seen as standing against their own religion. Theocracies are a perfect example of how religion has been abused for conflict and oppression. Moving forward, to help others understand why we live in a government that is separate from the church, we should remind them of the values of our nation, that it's founded on the basis that everyone deserves freedom, especially religious freedom. That's why I've made this video, to reiterate that we live in a democracy that represents the differing opinions of over 327 million Americans. No religion should have the upper hand politically over one another because every citizen is exposed to the same amount of liberty and freedom. So having any one religion established can not only jeopardize their individual beliefs and the beliefs of their communities, but our country's basic and promised rights. After all, a place like America that promises to protect and foster its citizens must do the same for the multitude of ideologies, cultures, and religions that follow.